Atheist judge mocks God in front of Millionaire. But as the crowd watches in silence, the unexpected unfolds in a way no one saw coming. I hope you are having a wonderful day. Your story starts now. Judge Marcus Stern stood behind the polished oak podium, his fingers tracing the smooth edges as he surveyed the packed auditorium. The air buzzed with anticipation, a sea of expectant faces staring back at him. Lawyers, academics, and intellectuals from across the country had gathered for this prestigious legal conference, eager to hear from one of the most controversial figures in modern jurisprudence. At 58, Marcus cut an imposing figure. His salt and pepper hair was immaculately styled, and his steel-grey eyes held a sharp intelligence that had served him well throughout his career. He was known for his scathing wit, his contempt for religious arguments in court, and his unapologetic atheism. Today he planned to deliver a lecture that would cement his reputation as a champion of secular reason. As the lights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd, Marcus felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. He lived for moments like these, the chance to challenge outdated beliefs and push society towards what he saw as progress. With a confident smile, he leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating through the hall, "let's talk about the progress of modern society. And progress, as we know, means abandoning outdated dogmas." A ripple of laughter spread through the audience, some genuine, others merely polite. Marcus's gaze swept across the front row, and for a brief moment his eyes locked with those of a man he recognized instantly, Gabriel Rossi, the billionaire tech mogul known as much for his business acumen as for his unwavering religious faith. Marcus felt a spark of challenge ignite within him. Here was an opportunity too perfect to pass up. With a wry smile he continued, "After all, does anyone here still believe that there is an invisible being guiding our lives? Or can we finally accept that religion is just a convenient illusion?" The laughter this time was more hesitant, tinged with discomfort. But Marcus was just getting started. He fixed his gaze on Gabriel, who sat impassively, neither smiling nor frowning. "Ah, even the rich sometimes cling to these illusions," Marcus quipped. "Maybe money can buy luxury, but not reason." As the words left his mouth, Marcus felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air seemed to grow heavy, charged with tension. Gabriel Rossi slowly uncrossed his arms and rose to his feet, his presence commanding attention without a word spoken. Little did Marcus know that this moment would be the catalyst for a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about faith, reason, and the nature of truth itself. Gabriel Rossi stood, his posture relaxed yet authoritative. At 45, he exuded a quiet confidence that came not just from his billions, but from an inner certainty that had weathered countless storms. His dark eyes, usually warm and inviting, now held a steely resolve as they met Marcus's gaze. "Interesting," Gabriel began, his calm voice cutting through the silence. "A judge, supposedly a defender of critical thinking, resorting to mockery, instead of intellectual debate." Marcus felt a flicker of unease, but quickly masked it with a laugh. "Don't give me that litany," he retorted. "Science has already debunked all religious claims. Faith is a refuge for those who fear the truth." Gabriel tilted his head slightly, studying Marcus with an intensity that made the judge shift uncomfortably. "And what truth would that be?" the billionaire asked. "The truth that science, despite all its advances, still cannot explain the origin of consciousness? That the laws of the universe seem to be tuned with impossible precision for the existence of life? Or is your denial of God nothing more than another kind of faith, a blind faith in human limitations?" The auditorium fell silent, the tension palpable. Marcus gripped the podium tighter, his knuckles whitening. "That's just a fallacious argument based on gaps in knowledge," he snapped, his composure slipping. Gabriel smiled, a gesture devoid of mockery but filled with a quiet challenge. "Gaps," he repeated thoughtfully. "And what is the more intellectually honest position? To admit that there are mysteries beyond our understanding, or to pretend that we already have all the answers?" Marcus blinked rapidly, struggling to regain his footing in this unexpected debate. "You mean we should simply believe in the supernatural without proof?" he asked, his voice tinged with sarcasm. Gabriel took a step forward, his presence seeming to fill the room. No, I'm saying that a true thinker does not close doors to possibilities simply because they challenge his pride. The judge opened his mouth to respond, but for the first time in his career, words failed him. He looked out at the audience, searching for support, but found only curious and expectant faces. "What do you really fear, Judge Stern?" Gabriel pressed, his voice low but penetrating. "The idea that you might be wrong, or the idea that there might be something greater than yourself?" Marcus stood frozen, the weight of Gabriel's words settling over him like a heavy cloak. In that moment, he felt exposed, as if the certainties he had built his life upon were suddenly shifting beneath his feet. Without another word, Gabriel returned to his seat, leaving Marcus to face a room full of questioning gazes. As the conference drew to a close, the judge found himself sitting alone at the podium, his carefully prepared notes now a jumble of meaningless scribbles. For the first time in decades, Marcus Stern, the man who had built a career on mocking faith, was forced to confront a terrifying possibility. What if he had been wrong all along? The days following the conference passed in a blur for Marcus. He went through the motions of his daily routine, reviewing cases, writing opinions, presiding over hearings, but his mind constantly drifted back to that moment in the auditorium. Gabriel Rossi's words echoed in his thoughts, refusing to be dismissed. As he sat in his chambers one afternoon, staring unseeing at a stack of legal briefs, a knock on the door startled him from his reverie. "Come in," he called, straightening in his chair. His clerk, Sarah Chen, entered, a look of concern on her face. "Judge Stern, are you all right? You've seemed distracted lately." Marcus waved off her concern with a forced smile. "I'm fine, Sarah. Just thinking about a complex case." But Sarah wasn't so easily deterred. She had worked with Marcus for years and knew him better than most. "Is this about what happened at the conference? It's all over social media, you know." Marcus felt a surge of irritation. "What exactly is all over social media?" he asked, his tone sharp. Sarah hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "There's video of your exchange with Gabriel Rossi. It's gone viral. People are calling it the moment of doubt." She handed him the phone, and Marcus watched with growing dismay as the scene played out on the small screen. He saw himself, usually so composed and confident, looking flustered and uncertain in the face of Gabriel's calm questioning. "Turn it off," he snapped, pushing the phone away. He stood abruptly, pacing the length of his office. "This is ridiculous. One moment of caught off guard, and suddenly everyone's acting like I've had some grand epiphany." Sarah watched him carefully. "Have you?" she asked quietly. Marcus stopped pacing, turning to face her with a frown. "Have I what?" "Had an epiphany," she clarified, "or at least started to question things." For a moment Marcus was tempted to confide in her, to voice the doubts that had been plaguing him. But old habits die hard, and he found himself retreating behind a wall of sarcasm. "Question things, please. Rossi may be good at playing word games, but that doesn't change the facts. Science, reason, empirical evidence. These are the foundations of truth, not fairy tales and wishful thinking." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained skeptical. "Of course, Judge, I just thought, well, never mind, is there anything you need me to work on?" Marcus sank back into his chair, suddenly feeling very tired. "No, Sarah. Thank you. You can go." As the door closed behind her, Marcus buried his face in his hands. The truth was, he had been questioning things. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering if there might be more to the universe than what could be measured and quantified. But admitting that felt like a betrayal of everything he had stood for. His reputation, his career, his very identity were all built on his unwavering commitment to atheism and rationalism. To even consider the possibility of something more felt like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. And yet the questions persisted. What if Gabriel was right? What if there were mysteries beyond human understanding? What if his denial of God was, as the billionaire had suggested, just another form of faith? Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. He had always prided himself on his intellectual honesty, on following the evidence wherever it led. But now he was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Had he really been following the evidence, Or had he simply been reinforcing his own preconceptions? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his office, Marcus made a decision. He couldn't continue like this, caught between doubt and denial. He needed answers, real answers, not just the comfortable certainties he had clung to for so long. With a mixture of trepidation and determination, he picked up his phone and did something he never thought he'd do. He searched for information on Gabriel Rossi's charitable foundation, rumored to fund research into the intersection of science and spirituality. It was time, Marcus realized, to embark on a journey of discovery. Whether it led to a reaffirmation of his atheism or to something entirely unexpected, he owed it to himself and to the truth he had always claimed to serve, to follow this path, wherever it might lead. A week after his unsettling encounter with Gabriel Rossi, Marcus found himself staring at an embossed envelope on his desk. The return address bore the logo of the Rossi Foundation for Science and Spirituality. With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, he opened it. Inside was an invitation to a private symposium hosted by the foundation, bringing together scientists, philosophers, and spiritual leaders to discuss the big questions at the intersection of science and faith. Marcus's first instinct was to dismiss it, to toss the invitation in the trash and forget about this whole unsettling episode. But something stopped him. Maybe it was intellectual curiosity, or perhaps a deeper need to confront the doubts that had been gnawing at him. Whatever the reason, Marcus found himself picking up the phone to RSVP. The symposium was to be held at a secluded retreat center in the mountains, far from the distractions of the city. As Marcus drove up the winding road, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was entering unknown territory, both literally and figuratively. The retreat center was a modern architectural marvel, all glass and sustainable materials, seamlessly integrated into the natural landscape. As Marcus stepped out of his car, he was greeted by a familiar face. "Judge Stern," Gabriel Rossi said, extending his hand. "I'm glad you could make it." Marcus shook his hand, trying to mask his discomfort. "Mr. Rossi, I must admit I was surprised by the invitation." Gabriel smiled, a warm, genuine expression that caught Marcus off guard. "Life is full of surprises, Judge. Sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most profound discoveries." As they walked towards the main building, Gabriel explained the structure of the symposium. "We have a diverse group here: quantum physicists, neuroscientists, theologians, philosophers. The goal is not to prove or disprove anything, but to explore the boundaries of human knowledge and understanding." Marcus nodded, still wary but increasingly intrigued. "And where do I fit into all this? I'm hardly an expert in these fields." Gabriel stopped, turning to face him. "You, Judge Stern, represent something crucial, the voice of skepticism. We need that perspective, but we also need minds open to new possibilities. Can you be both skeptical and open?" The question hung in the air between them, a challenge and an invitation. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling as if he stood on the precipice of something monumental. "I can try," he said finally. Gabriel clapped him on the shoulder. "That's all anyone can ask. Now let's introduce you to the others. I think you'll find this weekend illuminating." As they entered the main hall, Marcus was struck by the diversity of the group assembled. There were familiar faces from the scientific community as well as religious leaders he recognized from various faiths. But there were also individuals he couldn't quite place, people with an air of quiet wisdom that seemed to transcend any single discipline. One woman in particular caught his attention. She stood apart from the others, her silver hair contrasting with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to look right through him. As if sensing his gaze, she turned and smiled, making her way towards him. "Judge Stern," she said, her voice carrying a hint of an accent he couldn't place. "I'm Dr. Amelia Reeves. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Marcus shook her hand, intrigued despite himself. "Dr. Reeves, I'm afraid I'm not familiar with your work." She laughed, a melodious sound that seemed to lighten the atmosphere. "That's quite all right. My field tends to make people uncomfortable. I study near-death experiences and their implications for our understanding of consciousness." Marcus felt a familiar skepticism rising within him, but he forced it down. He had come here to listen, to explore. "That sounds fascinating," he managed. "I'd be interested to hear more about your research." Dr. Reeves' eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Oh, you will, Judge Stern. In fact, I think you'll find that many of your long-held beliefs will be challenged this weekend. The question is, are you ready to have your world turned upside down?" As Marcus looked around the room at the assembled experts, each representing a different facet of the great mystery of existence, he felt a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. He had come seeking answers, but he was beginning to suspect that he might find something far more valuable and far more unsettling than mere answers. "I suppose we'll find out," he said, more to himself than to Dr. Reeves. And with that, the symposium began, setting Marcus on a path that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the nature of reality, consciousness, and his place in the universe. The first day of the symposium was a whirlwind of presentations and discussions that left Marcus's head spinning. He listened as a quantum physicist explained the observer effect and the double-slit experiment, demonstrating how the very act of observation seemed to influence reality at the quantum level. A neuroscientist presented research on the nature of consciousness, pointing out the gaps in our understanding of how subjective experience arises from the physical brain. But it was the afternoon session that truly shook Marcus's worldview. Dr. Amelia Reeves took the stage, her presence commanding attention without effort. She began by presenting case studies of near-death experiences, NDEs, from around the world, highlighting the consistencies in these accounts across cultures and belief systems. "What we're seeing," Dr. Reeves explained, her voice filled with quiet passion, "is a pattern of experiences that defy our current understanding of consciousness. People report vivid, coherent experiences during periods when their brains show no measurable activity. They describe seeing and hearing events that occurred while they were clinically dead, events later verified by medical staff." Marcus listened, with growing unease. He had always dismissed such accounts as hallucinations or the product of oxygen-deprived brains. But the evidence Dr. Reeves presented was compelling, to say the least. "But the most intriguing aspect," she continued, "is the profound and lasting effect these experiences have on the individuals. We see consistent personality changes, increased empathy, reduced fear of death, a sense of interconnectedness with all things. These changes persist for decades after the event." As the presentation concluded, Marcus found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. His rational mind sought to explain away these phenomena, to find some materialistic explanation that would fit within his existing worldview. But another part of him, a part he had long ignored, whispered that perhaps there was more to reality than he had allowed himself to consider. During the break, Marcus found himself in conversation with a soft-spoken man named Dr. David Chen, a researcher in the field of consciousness studies. "You seem troubled, Judge Stern," Dr. Chen observed. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm struggling to reconcile what I'm hearing with what I've always believed to be true." Dr. Chen nodded understandingly. "It's not easy to shift paradigms, but consider this. Throughout history, every major scientific breakthrough has required us to expand our understanding of what's possible. The Earth revolving around the Sun, quantum mechanics, the Big Bang. Each of these ideas seemed impossible, until we had the courage to consider them." "But this feels different," Marcus argued. "We're talking about consciousness surviving death, about experiences that can't be measured or replicated in a lab. How can we consider this science?" "Dr." Chen smiled patiently. "Science is a method of inquiry, Judge Stern, not a set of predetermined answers. It's about following the evidence wherever it leads, even if that path takes us to unexpected places. What Dr. Reeves and others are doing is applying rigorous scientific methodology to phenomena that challenge our current understanding. Isn't that the very essence of scientific progress?" Marcus fell silent, mulling over Dr. Chen's words. He had always prided himself on his commitment to reason and evidence. But had he been truly open to all the evidence, or only to that which confirmed his existing beliefs? As the day wore on, Marcus found himself engaging in discussions that would have been unthinkable just a week ago. He debated the nature of consciousness with neuroscientists, explored the implications of quantum entanglement with physicists, and even had a long conversation with a Tibetan Buddhist monk about meditation and its effects on the brain. By the time dinner was served, Marcus's mind was reeling. He sat at a table with Gabriel Rossi and a few others, picking at his food, as the conversation swirled around him. "You're quiet, Judge," Gabriel observed. "How are you finding the symposium so far?" Marcus looked up, meeting Gabriel's eyes. "It's not what I expected," he admitted. "I came here thinking I would hear a lot of pseudoscience and wishful thinking. Instead, I'm finding myself questioning things I've held as certainties for decades." Gabriel nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. "That's the beauty of true inquiry, isn't it? It forces us to confront our own assumptions, to step outside our comfort zones. But tell me, Judge Stern, what's really troubling you?" Marcus was silent for a moment, struggling to articulate the turmoil in his mind. "I've built my entire career, my entire identity, on the idea that faith is irrational, that the material world is all there is. If I open myself to these other possibilities, where does that leave me?" Gabriel leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "It leaves you exactly where you've always been, Judge, in pursuit of the truth. The only difference is that you're now willing to consider a wider range of possibilities in that pursuit." As the evening wound down, Marcus found himself standing on a balcony overlooking the mountains, the cool night air helping to clear his head. He thought about the cases he had presided over, the times he had dismissed religious arguments out of hand. Had he been too hasty, too certain in his certainty? A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Dr. Reeves said, joining him at the railing. Marcus nodded, gazing out at the star-filled sky. "It is. Dr. Reeves, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "How do you reconcile your scientific training with the implications of your research? Don't you ever doubt?" Dr. Reeves smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Doubt is an essential part of the scientific process, Judge Stern. I doubt every day. I question my methods, my conclusions, my assumptions. But I've learned that doubt isn't the enemy of discovery. It's the catalyst. It's what drives us to look deeper, to ask the hard questions." As Marcus pondered her words, a shooting star streaked across the sky. For a brief moment, he felt a sense of wonder that he hadn't experienced since childhood, a feeling that the universe was vast and mysterious and full of possibilities he had yet to imagine. "Thank you, Dr. Reeves," he said softly. "I think I'm beginning to understand." As he headed to his room that night, Marcus realized that while he hadn't found the clear-cut answers he had initially sought, he had gained something perhaps more valuable: the willingness to question, to explore and to consider possibilities beyond the boundaries of his previous understanding. Little did he know that the most challenging and transformative experiences of the symposium were yet to come. The second day of the symposium dawned clear and crisp, the mountain air invigorating as Marcus stepped out for an early morning walk. His mind was still buzzing from the previous day's revelations, and he hoped the solitude would help him process everything he had learned. As he rounded a bend in the trail, he came across Gabriel Rossi, who was sitting on a boulder, seemingly lost in thought. "Good morning, Judge Stern," Gabriel greeted him with a warm smile. "Care to join me?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before taking a seat next to the billionaire. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. "You know," Gabriel said at last, "I was once where you are now." Marcus turned to him, surprised. "What do you mean?" Gabriel's eyes held a distant look, as if peering into the past. "I was raised in a strictly atheist household. Science was our religion, reason our God. I built my tech empire on the foundation of rational materialism. But then—" He trailed off, and Marcus found himself leaning in, eager to hear more. "Then—" "What?" he prompted. Gabriel met his gaze, his expression serious. "Then I had an experience that shattered my worldview. It wasn't a near-death experience like the ones Dr. Reeves studies. It was something else, something I still struggle to put into words." Marcus felt a mix of skepticism and curiosity. What kind of experience? Gabriel was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. Have you ever heard of non-dual consciousness, Judge Stern? Marcus shook his head. It's a state of awareness described in various spiritual traditions, Gabriel explained. A dissolution of the perceived boundary between self and other, between observer and observed. I experienced it during a meditation retreat. For a brief moment I felt myself to be one with everything, the universe looking at itself through my eyes. He paused, gauging Marcus's reaction. I know how it sounds. If someone had told me this a few years ago, I would have dismissed it as New Age nonsense. But the experience was more real, more profound than anything I had ever known. It changed everything for me. Marcus struggled to find words. Part of him wanted to dismiss Gabriel's account, to file it away as a subjective, unverifiable experience. But another part, the part that had been slowly awakening over the past day, was intrigued. How did you reconcile this experience with your scientific worldview? He asked. Gabriel smiled. That's the question, isn't it? It's why I started the foundation, why I organized this symposium. I believe that science and spirituality are not antagonists, but complementary approaches to understanding reality. We need both the rigorous methodology of science and the experiential wisdom of contemplative traditions to truly grasp the nature of consciousness and our place in the universe. As they made their way back to the retreat center, Marcus found himself mulling over Gabriel's words. He had always seen science and spirituality as mutually exclusive, but was it possible that they were actually two sides of the same coin? The morning sessions did little to settle Marcus's internal debate. He listened to presentations on the hard problem of consciousness, on the anthropic principle in cosmology, on the potential role of quantum effects in biological systems. Each talk seemed to push the boundaries of scientific understanding, hinting at realms of reality that defied easy categorization. During the lunch break, Marcus found himself drawn into a heated discussion with Dr. Chen and a quantum physicist named Dr. Eliza Wong. But if consciousness is fundamental to reality, as some of these theories suggest, Marcus argued, wouldn't that imply some kind of cosmic mind? Isn't that just God by another name? Dr. Wong shook her head. Not necessarily. We're not talking about a personal deity here, but rather a fundamental property of the universe, like mass or charge. The idea is that consciousness might be an intrinsic aspect of reality at the quantum level, but that's a radical departure from our current understanding of physics, Marcus protested. Dr. Chen nodded. It is. But remember, Judge Stern, every major paradigm shift in science has seemed radical at first. The idea that the Earth moves around. The sun was once considered heretical. Now it's elementary school knowledge. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself grappling with concepts that stretched the limits of his understanding. He listened to discussions on the nature of time, on the possibility of multiple universes, on the potential for consciousness to influence reality at a fundamental level. By the time the day's sessions ended, Marcus's head was spinning. He had come to the symposium expecting to reaffirm his materialist worldview, but instead found himself standing at the edge of a vast unknown. The certainties he had clung to for so long seemed to be slipping away, replaced by questions that defied easy answers. As he made his way to dinner, Marcus overheard snippets of conversation that would have seemed absurd to him just days ago. Respected scientists discussing the possibility of consciousness surviving bodily death, philosophers debating the nature of free will in light of quantum indeterminacy, spiritual leaders finding common ground with physicists in their understanding of interconnectedness. He took a seat at a table with Dr. Reeves and a neuroscientist he had met earlier, Dr. Sarah Goldstein. As they ate, the conversation turned to the implications of the day's discussions. It's all so overwhelming, Marcus admitted. How do you make sense of it all? Dr. Goldstein smiled sympathetically. That's the thing, Judge Stern. We're at the cutting edge of human knowledge here. In many ways, we're like the early explorers, venturing into uncharted territory. We don't have all the answers yet, and that can be unsettling. Dr. Reeves nodded in agreement. But it's also exciting, isn't it? We're pushing the boundaries of what's known, asking questions that could fundamentally change our understanding of reality. Marcus pondered this. But how do we navigate this unknown? How do we distinguish between genuine insights and flights of fancy? That's where the scientific method comes in, Dr. Goldstein explained. We form hypotheses, design experiments, collect data. But we also need to be open to new paradigms, new ways of thinking about consciousness and reality. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself drawn into deep conversations with various attendees. He debated the nature of free will with a philosopher, discussed the potential implications of panpsychism with a cognitive scientist, and even had a long talk with a Sufi mystic about the experience of unity consciousness. Later, as he stood on the balcony again, gazing at the star-filled sky, Marcus felt a profound sense of humility wash over him. The universe, he realized, was far vaster and more mysterious than he had ever imagined. His previous certainties now seemed like a child's understanding, compared to the depths of the unknown that stretched before him. Gabriel Rossi joined him, leaning on the railing. "Quite a day, wasn't it?" he said softly. Marcus nodded, still, looking at the stars. "I feel like I've been living in a small room all my life and suddenly the walls have fallen away. It's terrifying and exhilarating all at once." Gabriel smiled. "That's a good way to put it. You know, Judge Stern, the greatest minds in history have stood where you're standing now at the edge of the known, peering into the vast unknown. It takes courage to step into that uncertainty, to admit that there's more to learn." Marcus turned, to face him. "But where does that leave us? If everything I thought I knew is in question, how do I move forward?" Gabriel's eyes held a depth of understanding. "With humility, Judge Stern, with wonder, with a willingness to keep exploring, keep questioning. The journey doesn't end here, it's only beginning." As Marcus headed to his room that night, his mind was a whirlwind of new ideas and possibilities. He realized that while he had come seeking answers, what he had found instead was a whole new set of questions, questions that would challenge him, inspire him, and perhaps lead him to a deeper understanding of himself and the universe he inhabited. Little did he know that the next day would bring an experience that would shake the very foundations of his reality, forcing him to confront not just abstract ideas, but the deepest truths of his own consciousness. The third day of the symposium dawned with an air of anticipation. As Marcus made his way to the main hall, he overheard excited whispers about a special session planned for the afternoon. Curiosity piqued. He approached Dr. Reeves for more information. "Ah, Judge Stern," she greeted him with a knowing smile. "Yes, we have something rather unique planned for today. Tell me, have you ever experienced a deep meditative state?" Marcus shook his head. "I've always viewed meditation as pseudo-scientific nonsense," he admitted, then quickly added, "though I suppose I'm learning to be more open-minded about such things." Dr. Reeves nodded approvingly. "Well, today you'll have the opportunity to experience it firsthand. We've brought in Dr. Samantha Rao, a neuroscientist who specializes in studying altered states of consciousness. She'll be leading a guided meditation, a session combined with some cutting-edge neurofeedback technology." Marcus felt a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "And what's the purpose of this experiment?" "To give you a direct experience of what we've been discussing theoretically," Dr. Reeves explained. "Sometimes, Judge Stern, understanding requires more than just intellectual knowledge. It requires first-hand experience." As the morning sessions progressed, Marcus found his attention wandering, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of the afternoon's experiment. He had always prided himself on his rational, analytical approach to life. The idea of deliberately altering his state of consciousness was both intriguing and slightly unnerving. Finally, after lunch, the participants gathered in a large, dimly lit room. Comfortable meditation cushions were arranged in a circle, with strange-looking headsets placed next to each one. Dr. Samantha Rao, a serene-looking woman in her 40s, stood in the center of the circle. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice calm and reassuring. "Today we're going to embark on a journey of consciousness, The headsets you see are equipped with EEG sensors that will monitor your brainwaves. As we enter into a meditative state, you'll receive subtle audio and visual feedback to help guide you into deeper levels of awareness. Marcus settled onto a cushion, feeling slightly ridiculous as he put on the high-tech headset. He glanced around, noting that even the most esteemed scientists in the room seemed to be approaching the experiment with open minds. "Close your eyes," Dr. Rao instructed, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality. "Focus on your breath, in and out, in and out." As Marcus followed her instructions, he was surprised to find how quickly the outside world began to fade away. The gentle tones and soft lights from the headset seemed to sync with his breathing, guiding him into a state of deep relaxation. Time seemed to lose all meaning as Marcus sank deeper into the meditation. He became acutely aware of the rhythms of his body, his heartbeat, the flow of blood through his veins, the electrical impulses of his neurons firing. And then something shifted. It happened so gradually that Marcus couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but suddenly he was aware of a vast, all-encompassing presence. It was as if the boundaries of his self had dissolved, and he was experiencing the universe from the inside out. Colors swirled behind his closed eyelids, forming intricate patterns that seemed to hold the secrets of creation. He felt a profound sense of interconnectedness, as if he could sense the consciousness of every person in the room, of every living being on the planet. In that timeless moment, Marcus understood, not with his rational mind but with his entire being. He grasped in a way that defied words the unity underlying all of existence. The debates about consciousness, about the nature of reality, all seemed to fall away in the face of this direct experience. And then, gently, he felt himself being guided back. Dr. Rao's voice, soft and distant at first, grew clearer. "Slowly begin to bring your awareness back to your body. Feel the weight of your limbs, the cushion beneath you. When you're ready, open your eyes." Marcus blinked, the world coming back into focus. He felt dazed, as if he had just woken from their vivid dream. But it hadn't been a dream. It had been more real than anything he had ever experienced. Looking around, he saw similar expressions of awe and bewilderment on the faces of the other participants. Some were weeping silently. Others sat in stunned silence. Dr. Rao spoke softly, her voice filled with understanding. "What you've just experienced is what many traditions call non-dual awareness or unity consciousness. It's a state in which the perceived boundaries between self and other, between subject and object, dissolve." Marcus struggled to find words. How could he possibly articulate what he had just experienced? It defied all logic, all rational explanation, and yet it had been undeniably real. As the group began to stir, sharing their experiences in hushed tones, Marcus caught sight of Gabriel Rossi. The billionaire was watching him with a knowing smile, as if he understood exactly what Marcus had just been through. In that moment, Marcus realized that everything had changed. His worldview, his understanding of consciousness, his very sense of self, all had been irrevocably altered by this experience. He had stepped off the edge of the known and into a vast new territory of understanding. As he stumbled out of the meditation room, still reeling from the experience, Marcus knew that his life would never be the same. The journey he had begun when he accepted Gabriel's invitation had led him to a place he could never have imagined, a place of profound mystery, wonder, and possibility. In the days following the profound meditation experience, Marcus found himself in a state of constant introspection. The world around him seemed both familiar and utterly transformed, as if he were seeing everything through new eyes. As he sat in his chambers back at the courthouse, he struggled to reconcile his recent experiences with the routine of his daily life. Sarah, his clerk, noticed the change immediately. "Judge Stern," she ventured cautiously one morning, "is everything all right? You seem different since you returned from that symposium." Marcus looked up from the case file he'd been staring at blankly for the past hour. "Different how?" he asked, genuinely curious about how his inner turmoil might be manifesting outwardly. Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Well, you seem more contemplative, less certain perhaps. And yesterday, during the Hendricks case, you actually entertained Reverend Johnson's argument about the role of faith in community rehabilitation. That's not like you at all." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a wry smile playing at his lips. "No, I suppose it isn't," he admitted. "Sarah, have you ever had an experience that completely upended your understanding of the world?" She shook her head, looking intrigued. "Well, that's what happened to me at that symposium," Marcus continued. "I went there expecting to reaffirm my beliefs, to gather more ammunition for my rationalist worldview. Instead, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew." Sarah's eyes widened. "Does this mean you've become religious?" Marcus chuckled. "No, not in the conventional sense. But I've come to realize that the universe is far more complex and mysterious than I ever imagined. There are aspects of reality, of consciousness, that defy our current scientific understanding, and I can no longer dismiss these mysteries out of hand." As the weeks passed, the changes in Marcus became more pronounced. His rulings, once known for their strict adherence to secular rationalism, began to show a more nuanced understanding of the role of faith and spirituality in people's lives. He found himself more willing to listen to arguments he would have previously dismissed, more open to considering alternative perspectives. This shift did not go unnoticed. Legal blogs buzzed with speculation about the sudden change in Judge Stern's judicial philosophy. Some praised his newfound openness, while others accused him of abandoning reason in favor of mysticism. One afternoon, as Marcus was leaving the courthouse, he was confronted by a group of reporters. "Judge Stern," one called out, "is it true that you've had a religious conversion? Are you abandoning your commitment to secularism?" Marcus paused, considering his response carefully. "I haven't had a religious conversion," he said finally. "What I've had is an expansion of perspective. I've come to realize that the questions of consciousness, of the nature of reality itself, are far more complex than I once believed. My commitment is, as it has always been, to the pursuit of truth and justice. But I now understand that this pursuit must encompass a broader range of human experience and understanding." As he drove home that evening, Marcus reflected on the ripple effects of his transformation. He thought about the cases he had judged over the years, the arguments he had dismissed, the perspectives he had failed to consider. While he didn't regret his past rulings, he had always strived to interpret the law to the best of his ability. He wondered how his newfound openness might influence his future decisions. At home, Marcus found himself drawn to books he would have scoffed at just months ago. He delved into works on quantum physics, Eastern philosophy, and the latest research on consciousness. He even began a daily meditation practice, marveling at how quickly it had become an essential part of his routine. One evening, as he sat on his balcony watching the sunset, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Gabriel Rossi. "How are you holding up, Judge? Ready for another paradigm shift?" Marcus smiled, realizing that his journey was far from over. The symposium had been just the beginning, the first step on a path of exploration and discovery that would likely last the rest of his life. As he typed his reply, Marcus felt a sense of excitement and anticipation. He had spent decades believing he had all the answers. Now he was learning to embrace the questions, to find wonder in the mystery of existence, and somehow that felt more fulfilling than any certainty he had ever known. "Ready as I'll ever be," he wrote back. "What's next?" Little did Marcus know that his personal transformation was about to intersect with a case that would challenge not just his newfound perspectives, but the very foundations of legal and scientific understanding. The ripples of change were about to become a tidal wave, one that would reshape not just Marcus's life, but potentially the course of jurisprudence itself. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Marcus's chambers as he reviewed the docket for the day. His eyes fell on a case that made him pause. Stevenson versus Neurocorp. It seemed like a straightforward medical malpractice suit at first glance, but as Marcus delved deeper into the details, he realized this case was anything but ordinary. Dr. Elena Stevenson, a renowned neuroscientist, was suing Neurocorp, a leading brain-computer interface company, for what she claimed was a profound violation of her consciousness. Stevenson had volunteered for an experimental procedure that promised to enhance cognitive function through a neural implant. But according to her lawsuit, something had gone terribly wrong. As Marcus read through the case files, his heart began to race. Stevenson claimed that during the procedure, she had experienced a state of expanded consciousness similar to what Marcus had encountered during the meditation session at the symposium. But unlike Marcus's temporary experience, Stevenson's state had persisted. She reported a constant sense of interconnectedness with all things, an inability to perceive clear boundaries between herself and the world around her. NeuroCorp, for their part, argued that Stevenson's claims were subjective and unmeasurable. They pointed to brain scans showing no unusual activity and psychological evaluations that deemed her mentally sound. Their lawyers argued that experiences of expanded consciousness were not recognized by mainstream science and thus had no place in a court of law. As Marcus prepared for the preliminary hearing, he found himself in uncharted territory. His old self would have dismissed Stevenson's claims outright, but now, having glimpsed the vastness of consciousness himself, he couldn't simply ignore her experience. The courtroom was packed as the hearing began. Marcus could feel the weight of expectation in the air. This case had drawn attention not just from the legal community, but from neuroscientists, philosophers, and spiritual leaders around the world. "Your Honor," NeuroCorp's lawyer began, "this case has no merit. Dr. Stevenson's claims are based on subjective experiences that cannot be verified or measured. We move for an immediate dismissal." Marcus leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Counselor, are you arguing that subjective experiences have no place in our legal system?" The lawyer faltered for a moment. "No, Your Honor, but because it seems to me," Marcus continued, "that much of our law is based on subjective human experience. Pain and suffering, emotional distress, the state of mind of a defendant. These are all subjective experiences that we consider valid in a court of law." A murmur ran through the courtroom. This was not the Judge Stern many had expected to. "See?" Dr. Stevenson's lawyer seized the opening. "Your Honor, my client's experience may be subjective, but its effects on her life are very real and measurable. She can no longer perform her work as a neuroscientist because her perception of reality has been fundamentally altered. This is not a matter of philosophy, but of real harm done to a person's ability to function in society." As the arguments continued, Marcus found himself navigating complex questions at the intersection of law, neuroscience, and philosophy. He questioned expert witnesses about the nature of consciousness, the limits of current scientific understanding, and the potential implications of brain-computer interfaces on human identity. One exchange particularly stood out. Dr. Samantha Rao, the neuroscientist who had led the meditation session at the symposium, was called as an expert witness. "Dr. Rao," Marcus asked, "in your professional opinion, is it possible for a brain-computer interface to induce a persistent state of expanded consciousness like the one Dr. Stevenson describes?" Dr. Rao paused thoughtfully before answering. "Your Honor, based on our current understanding of consciousness, I would have said no. But our understanding is rapidly evolving. We're discovering that consciousness is far more complex and potentially far more expansive than we once believed. While we can't yet explain or measure the state Dr. Stevenson describes, we also can't rule out the possibility that the neural implant has indeed affected her consciousness in profound and unexpected ways." As the hearing progressed, Marcus realized that this case was pushing the boundaries not just of law, but of science and philosophy as well. He was being asked to make a ruling that could have far-reaching implications for the future of neurotechnology, human rights, and our very understanding of consciousness. When the time came for his decision on whether to allow the case to proceed to trial, Marcus took a deep breath. He knew his ruling would be scrutinized, debated, and potentially appealed. But he also knew that he had to follow his conscience, informed by both his legal training and his recent experiences. "This court finds," Marcus began, his voice steady, "that Dr. Stevenson's case raises significant and novel questions that merit full consideration in a trial. While the nature of consciousness remains a subject of scientific and philosophical debate, The potential for technology to fundamentally alter a person's subjective experience of reality is a matter of grave importance to our society. He paused, looking out at the rapt faces in the courtroom. This case challenges us to expand our legal framework to encompass the complexities of the human mind in the age of neurotechnology. It is not a challenge we can shy away from. The trial will proceed. As the gavel fell, Marcus knew that he had just opened the door to a legal battle that would push the boundaries of law, science, and human understanding. But more than that, he had taken a stand for the validity of subjective human experience in a world increasingly dominated by technology and materialism. As he left the courtroom, surrounded by a buzz of excited conversation, Marcus felt a mix of trepidation and exhilaration. He had set foot on a path that would not only change his own life, but potentially shape the future of human consciousness itself. In the weeks following his decision to allow the Stevenson versus Neurocorp case to proceed to trial, Marcus found himself at the center of a storm of controversy and debate. Legal scholars, neuroscientists, and philosophers from around the world weighed in on the implications of his ruling. Some hailed it as a visionary step towards a more holistic understanding of human consciousness in the legal system, while others decried it as a dangerous departure from scientific materialism. Marcus weathered the storm with a newfound sense of calm. The meditation practice he had begun after the symposium helped him maintain his center amidst the swirling chaos of public opinion. Each morning, before donning his judicial robes, he spent time in quiet reflection, grounding himself in the expanded awareness he had glimpsed during that transformative experience. One afternoon, as he was leaving the courthouse, he was approached by a young law student named Michael Chen. "Judge Stern," Michael called out, a mix of nervousness and excitement in his voice. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say, your ruling in the Stevenson case, it's why I decided to go into law." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, how so?" Michael's eyes lit up. "I've always been fascinated by the intersection of law and emerging technologies, but your ruling, it showed me that the law can be a tool for exploring the deepest questions of human existence. It's not just about regulations and precedents, but about grappling with the very nature of consciousness and identity." As they talked, Marcus was struck by the young man's passion and intelligence. He saw in Michael a reflection of his younger self, eager, idealistic, but also open to possibilities that the Marcus of a few months ago would have dismissed out of hand. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah, Marcus's clerk, who had a worried look on her face. "Judge Stern," she said urgently, "you need to see this." She handed him her tablet, open to a news article. The headline made Marcus's heart skip a beat. "Neurocorp whistleblower comes forward. Consciousness alteration was intentional." As Marcus quickly scanned the article, he felt a mix of vindication and deep concern. According to the whistleblower, a former Neurocorp scientist, the company had been secretly working on technology to induce permanent states of expanded consciousness. Dr. Stevenson's experience wasn't an accident. It was the successful outcome of a covert experiment. "This changes everything," Marcus murmured. The implications were staggering. If the whistleblower's claims were true, it meant that humanity was on the brink of a technological breakthrough that could fundamentally alter the nature of human consciousness. The legal, ethical, and philosophical questions raised by such technology were overwhelming. As Marcus hurried back to his chambers to digest this new information, he realized that the Stevenson case was just the tip of the iceberg. The coming trial would not just be about one woman's experience, but about the future of human consciousness itself. Over the next few days, Marcus threw himself into research. He pored over the latest studies in neuroscience, consulted with experts in consciousness research, and even reached out to Gabriel Rossi for insights from the cutting edge of technology and spirituality. One evening, as he sat in his study surrounded by books and papers, Marcus had a moment of clarity. He realized that his personal journey, from staunch materialist to open-minded explorer of consciousness, had prepared him for this moment. He was uniquely positioned to navigate the complex intersection of law, science, and human experience. that this case represented. But with that realization came a heavy sense of responsibility. The decisions he would make in the coming trial could set precedents that would shape the future of humanity's relationship with consciousness-altering technology. As he pondered the weight of this responsibility, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Dr. Amelia Reeves, the near-death experience researcher from the symposium. "Heard about the NeuroCorp whistleblower," the message read. "Fascinating. Implications for our understanding of consciousness. Would love to discuss. Dinner tomorrow?" Marcus smiled, grateful for the connection to someone who understood the magnitude of what was unfolding. He quickly replied, accepting the invitation. As he prepared for bed that night, Marcus felt a mix of excitement and trepidation about the path ahead. He knew that the coming weeks and months would be challenging, pushing him to the limits of his understanding and his capabilities as a judge, but he also felt a deep sense of purpose. He was no longer simply interpreting the law, he was helping to shape a legal framework for a future where the boundaries of human consciousness itself were being redrawn. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus's last thoughts were of the vast, interconnected consciousness he had experienced during the meditation session. He couldn't help but wonder, was humanity on the brink of making that expanded state of awareness accessible to everyone? And if so, were they ready for the profound transformation that would bring? The Stevenson versus NeuroCorp trial loomed on the horizon, promising to be a landmark case that would challenge not just the legal system, but the very foundations of human understanding. And Marcus Stern, once a staunch defender of materialist rationality, now found himself at the center of a revolution in consciousness. The day the Stevenson versus NeuroCorp trial began, the courthouse was surrounded by a sea of people. Protesters, supporters, media crews, and curious onlookers crowded the steps, their voices creating a cacophony of anticipation and debate. As Marcus made his way through the throng, he could feel the weight of history on his shoulders. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Dr. Elena Stevenson sat at the plaintiff's table, her eyes clear and focused despite the ordeal she had been through. On the other side, NeuroCorp's executives maintained a facade of calm confidence, but Marcus could sense the tension beneath their polished exteriors. As he took his seat at the bench, Marcus looked out over the packed courtroom. Journalists scribbled furiously in notebooks. Sketch artists captured the scene with quick strokes, and rows of spectators leaned forward in anticipation. In the front row he spotted familiar faces, Gabriel Rossi, Dr. Amelia Reeves, and even young Michael Chen, who had managed to secure a coveted seat. "All rise!" the bailiff called out, and a hush fell over the room. Marcus took a deep breath, centering himself before speaking. "Be seated. We are here today to begin proceedings in the case of Stevenson versus NeuroCorp. Given the unprecedented nature of this case, I want to remind everyone that while we will be exploring complex scientific and philosophical concepts, our primary concern is with the law and its application to the facts at hand." The opening statement set the stage for the battle to come. Dr. Stevenson's lawyer painted a picture of a woman whose very sense of self had been irrevocably altered without her informed consent. NeuroCorp's defense team argued that the changes Dr. Stevenson experienced were subjective and unmeasurable, and that she had been fully aware of the experimental nature of the procedure. As the trial progressed, Marcus found himself navigating uncharted legal territory. Expert witnesses from fields ranging from neuroscience to philosophy took the stand, offering testimony that often seemed more suited to a scientific conference than a courtroom. Dr. Samantha Rao, the neuroscientist from the symposium, provided crucial testimony about the nature of consciousness and the potential for technology to alter it. "What we're dealing with here," she explained, "is not just a change in brain function, but a fundamental shift in the way consciousness itself is experienced. It's as if Dr. Stevenson's consciousness has been expanded beyond the normal boundaries of the self." NeuroCorp's lawyers tried to discredit this testimony, arguing that such claims were unscientific and unmeasurable. But Marcus, drawing on his own experiences, pressed them on this point. "Counselor," he interjected during a particularly heated cross-examination, Are you suggesting that subjective experiences, simply because they cannot be measured with our current technology, have no validity in determining harm? The lawyer faltered. No, Your Honor, but then let me ask you this, Marcus continued. If a medical procedure left a patient in constant severe pain, but our instruments couldn't detect it, would you argue that no harm had been done? The courtroom fell silent as the implications of this question sank in. Marcus was pushing the boundaries of legal thinking, forcing everyone to confront the limitations of a purely materialist worldview in the face of human experience. As the trial entered its second week, the whistleblower's testimony sent shockwaves through the proceedings. The former NeuroCorp scientist provided evidence that the company had indeed been working on technology to induce permanent states of expanded consciousness, with the ultimate goal of marketing it as a form of technological enlightenment. This revelation shifted the focus of the trial from a simple case of medical malpractice to a much larger question. Does a company have the right to fundamentally alter human consciousness, even with consent? And if such alterations are possible, how should the law protect individuals in society? Throughout the trial, Marcus found himself drawing on the insights he had gained during the symposium and in his subsequent explorations. He asked probing questions that challenged both sides to think beyond traditional legal and scientific boundaries. One of the most poignant moments came when Dr. Stevenson herself took the stand. As she described her experience, her voice calm but filled with a deep sense of loss, the courtroom was spellbound. Imagine, she said, waking up one day and finding that the boundaries between you and the world have dissolved. Every moment is filled with a sense of profound interconnectedness, but also an overwhelming flood of sensations and emotions. I can no longer focus on my work, can no longer enjoy a simple conversation without being acutely aware of the vast web of consciousness that connects us all. It's beautiful, yes, but it's also terrifying. I didn't choose this, I wasn't prepared for it, and I can never go back to who I was before. As the trial neared its conclusion, Marcus knew that his ruling would have far-reaching implications. It would set precedents not just in the realm of medical ethics and technology law, but in how the legal system approached questions of consciousness and human identity. The night before he was to deliver his verdict, Marcus sat in his chambers, surrounded by legal texts, scientific papers, and philosophical treatises. He had spent weeks immersed in testimony, evidence, and deep contemplation. Now he had to distill all of that into a ruling that would shape the future. As he began to write, Marcus felt a sense of clarity descend upon him. He realized that this case was about more than just one woman's experience or one company's actions. It was about humanity's relationship with consciousness itself and the role of the law in protecting the most fundamental aspects of human experience. His pen moved across the page, words flowing as if from some deeper source of wisdom. Marcus knew that whatever he wrote would be scrutinized, debated, and likely challenged, but he also knew that he had been uniquely prepared for this moment. His own journey of transformation, allowing him to bridge the worlds of law, science, and human experience. As the first light of dawn began to seep through his window, Marcus put down his pen. He had done all he could. Now, it was time to deliver a verdict that would echo through the halls of justice and the annals of human consciousness for years to come. The courtroom was filled to capacity as Marcus took his seat at the bench. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Everyone present knew that they were about to witness a moment that would be remembered in legal and scientific circles for decades to come. Marcus looked out at the assembled crowd, his gaze moving from Dr. Stevenson to the NeuroCorp executives, then to the rows of spectators, journalists, and legal observers. He took a deep breath, centering himself before beginning to speak. In the case of Stevenson versus NeuroCorp, he began, his voice steady and clear, this court has been asked to consider questions that push the boundaries of our legal system and our understanding of human consciousness. We have heard testimony from experts in neuroscience, philosophy, and ethics. We have grappled with concepts that blur the lines between science and spirituality, between measurable fact and subjective experience. Marcus paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. At its core, This case asks us to consider a fundamental question. What rights do we have over our own consciousness, and what responsibilities do companies and researchers bear when developing technologies that can fundamentally alter that consciousness? He went on to summarize the key points of the case. Dr. Stevenson's altered state of consciousness, NeuroCorp's secret research into consciousness expansion, and the broader implications for society. This court finds that NeuroCorp did indeed violate ethical standards and legal obligations in its treatment of Dr. Stevenson. While the company may argue that the changes to Dr. Stevenson's consciousness cannot be objectively measured, the impact on her life and her ability to function in society is clear and demonstrable. A murmur ran through the courtroom, quickly silenced as Marcus continued. Furthermore, the evidence provided by the whistleblower shows that NeuroCorp was engaged in research that went far beyond what was disclosed to its test subjects. This represents a grave breach of trust and a violation of informed consent principles. Marcus leaned forward, his voice taking on a tone of grave seriousness. However, this case has implications that go far beyond a single company or individual. We stand at the threshold of a new era, one in which technology has the potential to fundamentally alter human consciousness. This presents both incredible opportunities and profound risks. He paused, looking out at the rapt faces before him. Therefore, in addition to ruling in favor of the plaintiff and ordering NeuroCorp to pay substantial damages, this court is recommending the establishment of a National Ethics Committee to oversee research and development in the field of consciousness-altering technologies. This committee should include scientists, ethicists, legal experts, and representatives from various philosophical and spiritual traditions. The courtroom erupted in a buzz of excited conversation, which Marcus quickly silenced with a rap of his gavel. Furthermore, he continued, this court calls upon legislators to begin the process of crafting new laws to address the unique challenges posed by consciousness-altering technologies. Our current legal framework is simply not equipped to handle the complexities of this emerging field. Marcus's voice softened slightly as he approached the conclusion of his verdict. Finally, this court would like to acknowledge the profound nature of the questions raised by this case. We have been asked to consider the very nature of human consciousness and identity. While the law must deal in concrete facts and measurable harms, we cannot ignore the deeper philosophical and spiritual implications of these technologies. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom one last time. It is the opinion of this court that as we move forward into this new frontier, we must do so with great care, wisdom, and a deep respect for the mysteries of human consciousness. Our laws and our science must evolve to encompass a more holistic understanding of what it means to be human. With a final rap of his gavel, Marcus concluded, "This is the verdict of the court. We are adjourned." As he rose to leave the bench, the courtroom erupted into a cacophony of voices. Journalists rushed to file their reports, lawyers huddled with their clients, and spectators engaged in heated debates about the implications of the ruling. Marcus made his way back to his chambers, feeling both drained and exhilarated. He knew that his verdict would be analyzed, criticized, and debated for years to come, but he also felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had done his best to navigate the uncharted waters where law, science, and consciousness intersected. As he sat at his desk, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point, Marcus realized that this verdict was not an end, but a beginning. The questions raised by the Stevenson vs. NeuroCorp case would resonate through society for years to come, challenging our understanding of consciousness, identity, and the very nature of human experience. And Marcus Stern, once a staunch materialist, now found himself at the forefront of a new legal and philosophical frontier, one that promised to reshape our understanding of what it means to be human in the age of consciousness-altering technology. In the months following the Stevenson vs. NeuroCorp verdict, Marcus watched as the ripples of his decision spread far beyond the courtroom. The case had captured the public imagination, sparking intense debates in legal circles, scientific communities, and society at large. One crisp autumn morning, Marcus found himself walking through a nearby park, leaves crunching underfoot as he tried to clear his head. The past few months had been a whirlwind of media interviews, speaking engagements, and heated discussions with colleagues. His inbox was flooded with messages from people around the world, some praising his vision, others criticizing what they saw as judicial overreach. As he rounded a bend in the path, he was surprised to see a familiar face, Dr. Elena Stevenson herself, sitting on a bench overlooking a small pond. She looked up as he approached, a small smile playing on her lips. "Judge Stern," she greeted him. "I thought I might run into you here eventually." Marcus hesitated for a moment before taking a seat next to her. "Dr. Stevenson, how are you doing?" She gazed out over the water, her expression thoughtful. "Better, I think. Your verdict. It didn't undo what happened to me, but it gave me a sense of validation and purpose." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I'm glad to hear that. If you don't mind me asking, what are you working on now?" Elena turned to face him, her eyes alight with a new sense of purpose. "I've started a support group for others who've had similar experiences, people whose consciousness has been altered by technology or other means, and I'm collaborating with researchers who are trying to develop ethical guidelines for consciousness research." As they talked, Marcus was struck by the profound impact his verdict had had, not just on Elena's life but on the broader scientific and legal landscape. New research centers were springing up, dedicated to exploring the frontiers of consciousness in an ethical, controlled manner. Law schools were introducing courses on consciousness and the law, grappling with the complex questions raised by the case. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Gabriel Rossi, who had apparently been taking his own morning walk. "Judge Stern, Dr. Stevenson," he greeted them warmly. "Mind if I join you?" As Gabriel sat down, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at the strange twists of fate that had brought the three of them together. A judge, a neuroscientist, and a tech billionaire, each transformed by their encounters with the mysteries of consciousness. "I've been meaning to thank you both," Gabriel said, his tone serious. "Your case and Judge Stern's verdict have had a profound impact on the tech industry. We're being forced to confront the ethical implications of our work in ways we never had before." Elena raised an eyebrow. "And is that a good thing from your perspective?" Gabriel nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. It's forcing us to be more thoughtful, more responsible. We're not just chasing the next breakthrough, we're considering the long-term consequences of our innovations." As they continued to talk, sharing their experiences and perspectives, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude. His journey, from skeptic to seeker, from strict materialist to open-minded explorer of consciousness, had led him to this moment. He had played a role in shaping a future where science, law, and spirituality could work together to explore the frontiers of human consciousness. The conversation eventually turned to the National Ethics Committee that Marcus had recommended. In his verdict, it was in the process of being formed, bringing together experts from diverse fields to grapple with the challenges posed by consciousness-altering technologies. "I've been asked to serve on the committee," Elena revealed, "to provide the perspective of someone who's experienced these alterations firsthand." Gabriel nodded approvingly. "That's crucial. We need voices like yours to guide us as we move forward." As the morning wore on, their discussion ranged far and wide, from the latest developments in neuroscience to the ancient wisdom traditions that had long explored the nature of consciousness. Marcus found himself marveling at how much his perspective had changed. Where once he would have dismissed talk of expanded consciousness as New Age nonsense, he now engaged eagerly in these discussions, drawing on his own experiences and newfound knowledge. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Gabriel turned to Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Judge Stern, your verdict did more than just set a legal precedent. It opened up a space for dialogue between science, law, and spirituality." "That's no small feat," Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of Gabriel's words. "I'm beginning to understand that, but it's also becoming clear to me that this is just the beginning. We're on the cusp of a new frontier in human understanding." Elena smiled, her eyes bright with the excitement of discovery. "And we get to be part of shaping that frontier. It's terrifying and exhilarating all at once." As they said their goodbyes, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and questions that had no easy answers. But he was no longer afraid of that uncertainty. Instead, he embraced it, recognizing it as the driving force behind human progress and understanding. Walking back to his chambers, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this point. From a skeptical judge to a pioneer in the legal approach to consciousness, he had undergone a profound transformation. And yet, he realized, the greatest changes were still to come, not just for him, but for all of humanity, as they ventured into this new frontier of consciousness exploration. 5 years had passed since the landmark Stevenson versus Neurocorp verdict, and Marcus Stern found himself standing at a podium once again. This time, however, he wasn't in a courtroom, but at the inaugural World Consciousness Summit, an event that brought together scientists, philosophers, legal experts, and spiritual leaders from around the globe. As he looked out over the sea of eager faces, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. The ethics committee he had recommended was now a well-established international body, setting standards for consciousness research and technology development. New laws had been crafted to address the unique challenges posed by consciousness-altering technologies, creating a framework that balanced innovation with human rights and ethical considerations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice strong and clear, "5 years ago we stood at the threshold of a new frontier. Today we find ourselves well into that journey, exploring the vast landscape of human consciousness with tools both scientific and spiritual." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "We've made remarkable progress. Our understanding of the brain and its relationship to consciousness has grown by leaps and bounds. We've developed technologies that can safely and ethically expand human awareness, offering new treatments for mental health disorders and opening up new realms of human potential." Marcus smiled, thinking of the many breakthroughs he had witnessed over the past few years. Meditation-enhancing devices that had revolutionized stress management and emotional regulation, virtual reality systems that allowed people to experience states of consciousness previously accessible only to long-term meditators, neural interfaces that helped locked-in patients communicate and even experience a form of freedom beyond their physical limitations. "But perhaps our greatest achievement," he continued, "has been the bridge we've built between science and spirituality. We've learned that these are not opposing forces, but complementary approaches to understanding the nature of consciousness and our place in the universe." He thought of the collaborations he had seen, neuroscientists working alongside Buddhist monks, quantum physicists engaging in dialogue with mystics, legal scholars consulting with indigenous wisdom keepers. The rigid boundaries between disciplines had become more fluid, allowing for a more holistic approach to the study of consciousness. "We stand now at the beginning of a new era," Marcus declared, his voice filled with a sense of wonder and possibility. "An era where we can explore the furthest reaches of human consciousness while remaining grounded in ethical considerations and legal protections." As he concluded his speech, Marcus reflected on his own journey. From a skeptical judge who dismissed anything beyond the material realm, he had become a leading voice in the integration of law, science, and spirituality. His experiences had taught him the value of openness, of being willing to question his own assumptions and embrace the mystery of existence. After the applause died down and he stepped away from the podium, Marcus found himself surrounded by familiar faces. Dr. Elena Stevenson, whose case had started it all, was now a respected researcher in the field of consciousness studies. Gabriel Rossi had redirected much of his tech empire's resources towards ethical consciousness research. And young Michael Chen, the law student he had met years ago, was now a promising legal scholar, specializing in the rights of individuals in the age of consciousness technology. As they gathered for a group photo, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. The journey had not been easy. There had been setbacks, controversies, and moments of doubt. But standing here, surrounded by colleagues and friends who shared his vision of a more conscious and connected world, he knew that it had all been worthwhile. Later that evening, as the summit's attendees mingled at a reception, Marcus found a quiet moment to step out onto a balcony overlooking the city. The stars shone brightly overhead, reminding him of that transformative moment years ago when he had first glimpsed the vastness of consciousness. He thought about the challenges that still lay ahead, the ethical dilemmas that would arise as consciousness technology continued to advance, the need to ensure that these powerful tools were used for the benefit of all humanity, not just a privileged few. But he also felt a deep sense of hope and excitement for the future. As he gazed up at the starry sky, Marcus Stern, once a staunch materialist, now a pioneer in the legal and ethical exploration of consciousness, smiled to himself. The journey of discovery was far from over. In fact, he realized it was just beginning, and he couldn't wait to see where it would lead next. You might also like one of the 2 videos on your screen. Feel free to watch them now, or subscribe to the channel to watch them later. Thanks for watching.